She drove into Nutbush, Tennessee on a Tuesday morning in 1984, wearing sunglasses and no makeup, in a rental car nobody would recognize. She had not been back in 26 years. She wanted to see if the town remembered her. It didn't. Not yet. Nutbush is a small community in Haywood County, West Tennessee, the kind of place that exists at the intersection of cotton fields and red clay roads and the specific unhurried rhythm of rural Southern life that doesn't change much from decade to decade. In 1984, it had perhaps a few hundred residents, a post office, a general store, a Baptist church, and the accumulated texture of a place that had been exactly itself for a very long time. It was not a town that paid particular attention to the outside world, and the outside world, for the most part, returned the favor. Anna Mae Bullock had grown up here in a sharecropper's cabin on Flag Grove Road, the daughter of Floyd and Zelma Bullock, who worked the land and raised their children in the tight, contained way that people raise children when resources are limited and expectations are clear. She had sung in the choir of the Spring Hill Baptist Church from the time she was old enough to stand without holding on to something. She had picked cotton in the summers. She had left at 17 with her sister Allen for St. Louis, which might as well have been another planet. And she had not come back. Not because she didn't want to. Because life moves in one direction when it moves at all, and by the time she had the means to return, she had also accumulated enough reasons to stay away. The distance between who she had been here and who she had become, the particular weight of going back to a place that knew you before you were anyone, the fear that the place would be smaller than the memory of it, or, worse, that the memory would be smaller than the place. She had been back once, briefly, in the 1960s, when the music was beginning, but the success hadn't yet arrived. That visit had been rushed and purposeful. She'd had somewhere to be afterward and had used the destination as a reason not to stay. This time, there was no destination. She had cleared 4 days from a schedule that didn't easily allow for cleared days, and she had flown to Memphis and rented a car and driven west on Highway 70 toward Haywood County, and she had not told anyone where she was going. She came in from the east and drove slowly, which was the only speed the roads encouraged. The cotton fields were there. The red clay roads were there. The water tower was there, painted with the town's name in letters she recognized from childhood as the first words she had ever associated with the concept of home. She drove past the road that led to the Flag Grove property. The cabin was gone, replaced by something more recent, but the road was the same road, and she did not stop. Not yet. She stopped at the general store. It was the kind of store that sells everything a small community needs and keeps nothing it doesn't. Canned goods, work gloves, feed, hardware, a counter with 4 stools and a coffee maker that ran all day. She sat at the counter and ordered coffee from a woman named Louise Patton, who was in her 60s and had worked there since she was young and had no reason whatsoever to connect the woman in sunglasses at the counter with the girl who had grown up 6 miles down the road. Tina Turner drank her coffee and looked around the store and said nothing about who she was. Louise brought her a refill without being asked, the way people do in small southern towns where hospitality is not a performance, but a reflex. She asked where the stranger was from, the way people do when a stranger sits at their counter. Tina said Nashville, which was true enough. Louise asked what brought her to Nutbush. Tina said she was passing through, which was not exactly true, but she didn't have a better answer ready. What she was actually doing was looking at the labels on the canned goods that were the same brands she remembered, looking at the wood of the counter, worn smooth in the same places, worn smooth by the elbows of everyone who had sat here before her. Looking at the quality of the light through the store windows, the particular pale yellow of a Tennessee morning in autumn, which was the same quality of light she had grown up inside and had not seen, not exactly this, anywhere else in the world. She sat at that counter for 40 minutes. Louise refilled her coffee twice more and did not push the conversation. At one point, without particularly planning to, Tina Turner cried, quietly, briefly, in the way that people cry when they are not crying about anything specific, but about everything at once, about the distance between here and there, and the years that make up that distance, and the impossibility of going back to a self that no longer exists. Louise put a paper napkin on the counter near her hand and said nothing. That was the correct thing to do, and she did it. Afterward, Tina drove to the Spring Hill Baptist Church. It was a Tuesday, which meant no service, But the church was unlocked in the way that small-town churches are often unlocked because the community they serve regards them as shared space rather than scheduled appointments. She pushed the door open and stood in the entry for a moment, letting her eyes adjust from the brightness outside to the interior dimness. The church was exactly as she remembered it, and not at all as she remembered it. The pews were the same pews. She was almost certain they were the same pews, the same dark wood, the same slightly uneven spacing. The windows were the same windows. The pulpit was the same pulpit, or one so similar as to be indistinguishable. But the scale was different. The building she remembered from childhood was large in the way that all buildings are large to children, full of authority and height, and the specific grandeur that comes from entering a space that is set aside for something serious. The building she was standing in now was modest, honest. A small Baptist church in a small Tennessee town, built by the community that needed it and maintained by the same. She sat in the back pew and she stayed there. She wasn't sure what she was waiting for. She had not come here with a plan. She had come because it was the place she associated most directly with the version of herself that existed before everything else, before Ike, and the music and the fame and the survival and the comeback. The girl who had sung here on Sunday mornings because singing was what she did, the way breathing was what she did, without audience or agenda or any concept that it would ever be anything other than what it was. She sat in the back pew for 30 minutes in the silence, and the dust-filtered light and the smell of old wood and candle wax that is the same in every church that has been used long enough to absorb its own history. Then the side door opened and people began to come in. It was a choir rehearsal. She had not known about it. There was no reason she would have, and she did not move because moving would have drawn attention, and she was not ready for attention. She pressed herself slightly into the corner of the pew and watched as 12 people of various ages filed in through the side door with sheet music and took their positions at the front of the church. The choir director was a young man she didn't recognize. He arranged his singers, consulted his sheet music, raised his hands. The choir began. They were singing a hymn she knew. Of course they were. There's a finite number of hymns in the Baptist tradition, and she had sung most of them here in this building, starting before she was old enough to read the words. This one she had known since she was 4 years old. She had sung it at her grandmother's funeral. She had sung it to herself in the worst years with Ike, when she needed something to hold on to that predated all of it. She held out for 3 verses. Then the choir hit the 4th verse, the one that rises, the one that the whole hymn builds toward, and something in her chest that had been held carefully in place since she drove into Nutbush that morning came loose, and before she understood what was happening, Tina Turner was singing. Not quietly, not under her breath, the way people sing in church when they know the words but don't want to be heard. She was singing the way she had always sung when the song took her over, with everything, fully, the way she had stood in this same building as a child and given the hymn everything she had because that was the only way she knew to give it. The choir heard her immediately. The voices around her shifted, adjusted, made room. The unconscious accommodation that singers make when another voice enters, that knows what it's doing. The choir director turned. He looked at the woman in the back pew. He did not yet know who she was. What he knew was that the voice coming from the back of his church was not a voice he had heard in Nutbush before, and he had been directing this choir for 7 years and knew every voice in Haywood County that was worth knowing. He did not stop the rehearsal. He turned back to his singers and kept conducting, and the choir sang, and the woman in the back pew sang with them, and the Spring Hill Baptist Church sounded for the length of that 4th verse, and the verse that followed, and the verse that followed that, like something it had not sounded like in 26 years. When the hymn ended, the director turned again. He asked, carefully, if the visitor would be willing to introduce herself. Tina Turner took off her sunglasses. There was a silence in the church that was different from the silence before. The choir members looked at each other, and then at her, and then at each other again. One woman, older than the rest, pressed both hands over her mouth. A younger man said, very quietly, a single word that was not quite a question. The choir director recovered first. He said with the particular composure of someone who has encountered something far outside his expectations and chosen dignity over spectacle. "We're glad you're home." She stayed for the rest of the rehearsal. She sang every song they sang, from the back pew, without sheet music, because she knew all of them. She did not come to the front. She did not make it a performance. She was simply a woman who had come home to her church after 26 years and sat in the back and sang, which was what she had always done here, which was where all of it had started. Afterward, she shook hands with every member of the choir. She spoke with the older woman who had covered her mouth, who turned out to have known her mother, who told her things about her family she hadn't known and couldn't have learned anywhere else. She sat in a pew with the choir director for an hour and talked about music and Nutbush and what it meant to carry a place inside you for a long time before you found your way back to it. She stayed in Haywood County for 3 more days. She visited the Flag Grove School, the one-room schoolhouse where she'd been educated, which was being considered for demolition. She spoke to the County Historical Society about its preservation. She drove the red clay roads. She ate at the diner in Brownsville and was recognized twice and handled it with the same ease she handled everything, directly, warmly, without making it into more than it was. On the last morning, before she drove back to Memphis, she stopped again at the general store. Louise was there. She brought her coffee without being asked. This time Tina Turner told her who she was. Louise looked at her for a moment, then she said, "I know who you are, honey. I knew when you walked in." She paused. "I just figured you didn't come back here to be Tina Turner, so I left you alone." Tina Turner looked at this woman who had put a napkin near her hand without comment while she cried, who had refilled her coffee 4 times and asked nothing of her, and felt something that she later described as the specific gratitude you feel when a stranger gives you exactly what you needed without being told what that was. She drove back to Memphis. She flew back to her life. The Flag Grove School was preserved. The County Historical Society moved forward, and Tina Turner's involvement, quiet and financial and unannounced, was part of why. It stands today as a museum, a one-room schoolhouse on a red clay road in Haywood County, Tennessee, where a girl named Anna Mae Bullock learned to read before she learned what her voice was going to do to the world. She went back to Nutbush several more times after that. Each visit was quieter than the last, smaller, more private. She learned that going home doesn't get harder the more you do it. It gets simpler. The distance shrinks. The self you were and the self you became stop seeming so far apart. The choir at the Spring Hill Baptist Church still talks about the Tuesday morning rehearsal in 1984. They talk about the sound of it, 12 voices and one more, filling a small church on a weekday, singing a hymn that all of them had known since childhood. They talk about the moment the director turned and saw who was in the back pew. They talk about what he said. "We're glad you're home." If this story moved you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe for more stories about the human beings behind music's greatest legends, and if you've ever gone back to a place that made you who you are, tell us about it in the comments. Don't forget to hit that notification bell so you never miss one of these stories.